Welcome to our panel on Catapulting Malta into the Future. We have 5 great individuals here who hopefully will share where Malta will be in the next number of years and perhaps shine a light on some of the pain points that we're all feeling at the moment. So perhaps to kick off, we'll start from a level of laying out our stall. Where is Malta at the moment? Where do we need to be getting to? And then we'll try and figure out the road to that point. So perhaps, Carly, maybe you might kick us off.
I knew you were going to start with me.
No, we start with the most beautiful ones.
Okay, so for me, it's been very much about the blockchain space. I think that I took a very strong standpoint on the space about a year and a half ago, almost leaving the gaming industry to kind of explore the technologies as what is blockchain, and now coming back almost and looking at how to adopt it over the gambling sector. And I think that we've already heard from the minister this morning as to how this is part of the Malta picture. So that's my perspective right now.
But where is Malta as a gaming jurisdiction? Where do you see it in the landscape right now, globally? Where does it sit?
I think it sits very positively. I mean, it's without a doubt that Malta stands out as one of the key players in the regulatory framework when it comes to iGaming. Even when you look from an M&A perspective, you see companies aiming towards a Malta license or trying to get their Malta license. It's very high up on the ambitions. So it seems like a no-brainer to me.
Enrico?
Yeah, I think as Silvio said, Malta is the home of gaming excellence. I think Malta is the epicenter of gaming and is becoming stronger in that position, certainly in Europe, but as we've seen, the majority of the market is in Europe. So I think Malta continues to strengthen its position of leadership when it comes to the gaming sector.
And as we go forward, where would you see it in the next 10 years? Where would you like to, if you came back to Malta, where would it be positioned at that point?
So first of all, I would love to continue to stay in Malta for the following 5 to 10 years. I think we have a lot of further growth to come. Of course, there is Brexit, which is wind in our back, so to speak. But Malta needs to continue to be at the forefront, continues to be leading when it comes to regulation. We heard a lot about responsible gambling. I think that's an area where, as an industry, we need to do more. We can do more, and Malta definitely has its place in that.
All right, Trevor.
I think Malta as a hub has a strong future. It's always been a hub, but as time has gone by, with the opportunities which have presented themselves, in particular the Brexit scenario with a number of operators who weren't traditionally Malta-based, but who are now looking at establishing themselves, creating a base in Malta, over time opportunities present themselves, and Malta has been agile and flexible enough to seize those opportunities, to seize those instances and turn them into opportunities. And that is what we're seeing. As a hub, there are the challenges, and Simon previously mentioned a few, especially linked to the HR element and to the infrastructure element. But if Malta continues working and developing not just its regulatory framework, because there was the major change, but also continues to enhance a compliance environment, an environment where communication between the different regulators starts taking place and there is a better coordination, then we can see that Malta truly establish itself as the European hub for the top-tier operators within the gaming environment.
Perfect. Johannes.
Yeah, so I'm having a moustache, so I need to say something differently than everyone.
Yeah, exactly.
No, but I'm on a little bit of another side note on this, because I see the license and the tax advantages Malta has. That's good, but the challenge going forward and what we face every day is people. And even if you have an arbitrarial advantage, if you can't get people here, because it doesn't matter, it's people who build technology. And we need to find the best and the brightest to be able to be on top of it. So Malta is a very limited space, and what I see is like very, very high inflation in cost of living, actually cost of running the business as well, which is not working in favor for the country.
Russell, our host for the day, what have you got for us?
I think Malta's got a natural advantage to some extent, given where it is, where it's placed geographically. The weather, of course, also helps. But I think as far as a first mover advantage, part of that has been mitigated. The fact that the license is not as far-reached as it was a decade ago. You look at France, Italy, Spain, soon to be Holland, soon to be Sweden. Part of that value has been mitigated, but I think from an ecosystem perspective, the ability to have an operator move to a country and be serviced from various angles, from experienced minds, is one of the advantages. But then working off some of the things that Johannes said, we need to be conscious about the example that I'd like is we could all be looking at the same goal in the same direction, but unless we're all aligned and complementing each other's efforts, and if somebody's out of line on that front, and I think then that will impact the whole effort going forward. I like the idea that we are trying to anticipate what the next hot thing is going to be. I'm a firm believer that esports is going to be a very exciting space, and I don't see it going anywhere. And we've just heard Simon's figures on Fortnite as well. I mean, it's phenomenal. And then we see films like Spielberg's Ready Player One, you know, that further supports it. But keeping on our medium and long-term goggles, I think, are going to be key, as well as our short-term ones, in order to anticipate future trends.
I know we'll have a lot of areas that we're going into in terms of the challenges that Malta's face, but if we were to work off what's strong that Malta has at the moment, what can we build on to kind of create the next iGaming iteration that comes along? What do you think are Malta's main key selling points? Maybe Enrico, you...
Yeah, I think what I love about Malta is that it's small, right? So we talked about it's small. This is an advantage and it's a restriction. But the fact that Malta is small, that there is a very good and close dialogue with the government, that investments are forthcoming. I think Malta is in a unique position to pride itself and take control of the future. And you know, of course, it's going to look a different Malta compared to the past Malta. So if we take Hong Kong, if we take Dubai as examples, very limited, very small footprint, but you know, a fantastic economy and a lot of investments that have allowed the economy to really develop. I see opportunities in Malta from that perspective. And the fact that the government is up for it, that the government is trying to establish Malta as the blockchain island, I think this is going to create, of course, opportunities as well as some maybe short-term challenges for us. But I remain very, very positive that there is an entrepreneurial spirit in Malta that permeates the private industry, the government, the public entities. And of course, they need also our support and our pushing them in order to deliver.
But the support is still there. You still find government 100% behind you.
I find the dialogue, they're definitely very open. Like I've seen in no other country I lived in, they're very open for dialogue.
Very good. Trevor?
I would say one of the unique selling points of the island is now the experience. So there is a lot of experience. There are a lot of lessons which have been learned by the key individuals who work in the sector, work on the island. And it's not just the people who work within the different companies which are established here, but you also look at the service providers on a number of different levels. There is a lot more experience. Let's talk about the regulator as well. Even the regulator has evolved with time. I would take as a positive example is the manner in which the regulator, the MGA in this case, has evolved over a period of time. Simon again in his previous in the previous presentation spoke about the change from one license in an EU member state, which is applicable across all different member states, so the .com approach. Well, that changed. We're in the .country we're in a .country now system. We need a license in the different jurisdictions. We need to accept that fact. There was a period of time where the MGA was very resistant to this change. And the truth is, the first licensee, Maltese licensee, which went to Italy and grabbed an Italian license, that was the reality. Operators needed to get these licenses. Now you see the MGA, which has adopted a more, let's say, .country approach, recognizing that it can still regulate the sector, it can still maintain Malta as the hub for most of these operators who, with their experience, run their operations in different European jurisdictions, but their main base, their main thought center is here in Malta. And that you learn through experience, but you also learn from dialogue. And now coming back to what was said, the dialogue which is constant with the MGA, and there's an open door policy where the MGA listens and takes on. The changes in the regulations are also the direct result of a lot of operators and service providers pushing for certain changes. I'm not saying that the system is perfect, far from it. The MGA, for us, is proving to be a great help, but there are other institutions on the island which, unfortunately, need a bit of a push. The number of challenges we face when going abroad to get licenses in other jurisdictions, and the questions we get asked, especially on a money laundering operations point of view, some of them are a bit uncomfortable. And how do you deal with those? Basically adopting a different regime of rules. Mm-hmm. So you are a Maltese company, but you adopt a different regime of rules which are much stricter, because currently the different regulators, and this is now coming back to the challenges we're facing, are coming back to us not on the MGAs, not on a licensing perspective, but on, for example, a money laundering perspective.
So the country's image abroad, its perception, these areas.
Rather than the image, I think that we need to tighten certain areas within the island.
Very good. Carly?
I think in terms of positive aspects of Malta, I'll try and keep on the positive track because I know we're going to talk about some of the challenges in a minute, but I think that I will make this a little bit more of a personal story. As a local individual who looks to expand their career in a space, you have a few options. Go abroad or stay home, stay in Malta. And when about 10 years ago, when I finished my first degree in internet communications and user experience technologies, there weren't many options for me. So I sat down at my computer and did what I could do, and I became an entrepreneur, and I ran a coupon affiliate site for a couple of years. And then, you know, you always want more. And then there were companies on the island that enabled me, and they were employing the people from Amazon, from eBay, from Google, upon which then I could learn. So I think one of the very positive aspects of Malta is that we are getting these large companies in the door, and they are enabling local talent to reach ambitions and goals and become thought leaders in turn over time. And I think that that's something that we see. Well, we saw this in my projection, which is about 5 years ago now, and now we're seeing it again. New companies coming out in all different areas of gaming and, again, blockchain, which are enabling people within sectors to learn, to grow, to take thoughts from international people who are coming to the island. And sure, some of these international individuals with these fantastic careers and aspirational positions don't stay long, but they still leave a very important impact on the local talent pool.
There's a positive spillover effect that's happening, and new companies are coming out of that and developing. So the Maltese are themselves embracing this in a big way and creating the next level.
That's my perspective, at least.
Perfect. Johannes, I want to change direction. You run, obviously, a very successful Catena media here. It's been a great growth and success story, but it's not without its challenges, I think, operating in Malta. Maybe you could run us through, from a CEO's perspective, of how what it is, what's it like right now, and what are the areas that perhaps the country needs to address to help you grow your business here a bit further.
I'll go back to the people thing, which everybody already mentioned, but without really, really good people, it's very hard to run a successful business.
Mm-hmm.
And just from a little reflection, I think when the industry was young, it attracted young people who came to Malta for ease of living, nice party life, and all those things. And when the industry grows, now we have people with families and all those things. It's a complete different challenge to have. Childcare, education, and all those things that are not really, well, I'm from the Nordics, so everything sort of works. And here it's tough to get kids into school and so on, and that affects their way of living on the island. And we have really, really talented staff.
Are these the growing pains of success,
yes,
or
I would say it's an infrastructure problem. When something grows, you need to add more stuff. And when something grows, and all of a sudden, instead of having 18 to 25-year-old people coming here to party and work for 2-3 years, you have families who come to stay with 2 or 3 kids. It's a total different infrastructural game. And our experience in Malta is behind on that.
And it's not keeping up. It's not providing that.
No.
So. Enrico, you obviously have the Year of the Industry. You won the new industry association. What are your members bringing to you? What are their biggest pain points at the moment?
Yeah, certainly. I think what Johannes mentioned are amongst the key issues that we face as an industry, but I think not only as a gaming industry, I think in general, the infrastructure is behind. And I think one of the challenges that we have is that business moves quickly. We need people today. These people that we've got on the island for a few years, they have kids today. And so they need to find apartments, they need to find schools, and if they cannot, then they will leave, essentially. They will go elsewhere, because we are as Malta, we are in a competitive environment. And so there are other locations hubs where the gaming industry is also strong. So there is a little bit of a mismatch when it comes to some of these big infrastructure projects. But of course, we collectively, Malta, need to start from somewhere. And the new international school, for example, is a good, in Mtarfa, is going to supply additional places for kids, for students. But this is going to be in...
Is this enough, or is it a drop in the ocean?
I think one of the problems which now Malta is facing is not just that there are realities, real problems regarding accommodation, cost of accommodation. I actually followed the news item yesterday, your meeting with the parliamentary secretary on the cost of renting property on the island, which is exponentially growing very fast. You have an infrastructure which is not as strong, education system which is key, which unfortunately it's good, but there aren't enough places. And this, because they're not rumors, they're facts. These facts are also hitting abroad. And when they hit abroad, I mean, you come and you try and recruit a foreigner to come into your company into Malta, because there are certain skill gaps which are a reality as well. And they tell you, listen, we've heard there isn't enough places in schools. We've heard that the property costs this much. We've heard that traffic is a problem. So I'd like to have a location which is close to the office. Now our own reality, our experience is, when we moved offices and moved to the center of the island, we actually made our employees happier. We moved away from another area of the island where the cost of living is much higher, the cost of renting office space is much higher, and we moved to the center of the island, and we actually made our employees happy. We thought that it would have the opposite effect, because we've moved away more from the party environment and moved closer to a family environment. But it actually worked out pretty well. So
decentralization is a...
We actually were quite surprised moving that way. But these realities are there and need to be faced, and they need to be faced pretty quickly, because unfortunately we're also becoming a bit of a victim of our own success. We've grown so much that we haven't let the other areas which are linked to the sector to grow at the same pace with us.
So we should have maybe the towns and villages of Malta adopting a gaming company.
That's a good idea.
Carla, I know you're not a fan of this. You think the transport links probably need to be a bit stronger for that to happen.
Yeah, I mean, just coming here this morning, I drive down the road and they've made one of the principal accent points to Spinola Bay a one-way, and I'm just like, how is this going to work? And I hate being late, just in principle. I think transport's one of the big problems that, I mean, I struggle with. It's not just getting places, it's also parking. And obviously central areas, every time I hear of a company taking an office in a central area, I'm thinking, oh great, I hope they've thought about parking. Because us Maltese, we like to drive. It sounds quite ridiculous, but we do like to drive. Thankfully, there are some new car sharing regimes that I've seen coming out, and we're seeing a little bit of innovation around things like that. But I think just to tap in onto the point that you made about, you know, moving companies outside of the area, it does really depend on the volume of your staff, because a lot of the rental properties are still in the central-ish areas. And not all people have a car. So tapping into the transportation thing, it's just like, okay, so I'm working with a company who's based out in Maree, and I'm a foreigner, and I want to live in central areas where I can walk everywhere. How do I get to work every morning without catching 4 buses? So that's a little bit of a challenge when we say, yeah, every village could adopt a company, but then we need to provide the supporting infrastructure to facilitate that. If it's car sharing, if it's, you know, renting a school bus in the morning.
Whatever it might. What from your side? How bringing in employees, trying to find them, all these things. What are the biggest issues you're facing in that?
Basically the same, but on a more positive note, I would just like to address a really good opportunity you have, because the long-term play is people. And if you educate people, then you can actually get that sustainable advantage in the country here, instead of importing people from Sweden or whatever like me. And I'm not too well into the university structure here in Malta, but I don't see when we recruit that we find people within tech and other areas in that extent. And Malta was very, very fast in adopting in the regulatories and made an advantage of that. But if Malta would just focus on people and start educating them and being a really strong hub for forward thinking in terms of, I heard in the word innovation, that's not going to happen if you don't educate people. But if Malta start looking in that area, that would be another rumor, completely in the opposite way of pollution, traffic, rental, blah, blah, blah. It would be the place to go to be smart.
But I think they're tapped out of talent. Malta is 0 unemployment. So if you want to expand, you need to import. If you need to import, then obviously you have all the elements that go with that.
But I think so I completely agree with your point, Johannes. I think the education, the fact that you have 0 or there is 0 unemployment doesn't mean that the people that are employed cannot aspire to have, you know, better jobs, higher paid jobs in the tech sector, in the, you know, in the gaming, in the so the development, the professional development, the education, this can be for both the kids, you know, out of university, but also for existing, you know, professionals in other disciplines. They want to.
But it doesn't have to be, if you're going to bring in all these people and maybe bring up some of the individuals. We have 10,000, I think, graduates come out of university. You still have to populate the public sector, the hospitals, all of these different areas. You know, so whether they're going to go in there or they're going to go into tech.
It's closer to 12.
It's 12, is it? Very good.
Right now there are the graduation ceremonies going on, but this is where I also believe operators need to take a certain proactive steps. One of the things we have experienced and we actively do is we actually sponsor a number of students, young students, who we offer part-time jobs. They're studying at MCAST, not at university, but at MCAST. We sponsor their course, and then we keep them on as employees with us. We have some of them who remain in Malta, but we've actually had 2 employees who then moved to Vienna, where the mother company is based, and they're working over there. So they actually packed up and decided to move to Vienna. So there are success stories, but I think this sort of adopt a student scheme, which we do, to a limited effect, because we're not a huge operator, just under 50 employees. But if more and more operators started doing this, then there could be a bit of a ripple effect as well.
But how do companies continue to operate here? You have a situation where you have full employment, you have new technologies coming along like DLT, blockchain, which are going to be adding into the flavor. You have a situation where you're telling us that schools are scarce, talent is scarce, all of this. So, and government wants to maintain its 4 to 6% growth. How do you marry all of those together in order to keep, you either go into Dubai-esque construction and start building schools everywhere and or expanding them. It doesn't seem like this is something that can happen overnight. So what happens now? Do companies need to maybe offshore some of their operations from here?
We are in a bit of a unique position, which helps, is that we've got a mother company in Vienna. We've got 400 employees based over there, so there's a lot of coordination and synergy. We import a lot. That's a reality we face. We import a lot, especially Italy and Spain. That's a reality which we operate in, whilst finding local talent, as I said. We find a few and we nurture.
But it's never enough. How do you fulfill your talent needs? You've got operations all over the world. Are you doing more abroad? Are you bringing more people to Malta? How are you managing it?
Currently, we're growing abroad more than in Malta. It's back to the, again, experience thing. We want experienced people, and experienced people have a family, and most of the time kids, so it's really hard to get them here. In UK or in US or in Belgrade or where we are operating, it's easier because there is the infrastructure we need.
So the infrastructure is providing a natural barrier. Let's move on to some of the issues that are coming up. Obviously, we have banking is a big area that has been plaguing the gaming industry a long time. What's the situation there, Enrico, at the moment? How is it for the gaming companies?
I think this is one of the areas of improvement, let's say, in Malta. Both when it comes to iGaming and when it comes to, for example, blockchain. We have a financial sector, a banking sector that is not supporting those industries, as simple as that. So it's an issue. We as an organization have been reaching out to the financial institutions to understand how we can work better, work closer together. And we're making some progress, especially when it comes to the procedure of obtaining an identity card and opening a bank account. Those are two specific processes that when you come from abroad have become more and more difficult. And so we spoke with a number of banks, and we're making some progress in terms of...
But are they just paying lip service, or are they actually opening accounts?
There is a concrete step that is being done by Banco Valletta specifically, whereby before it was required to have a bank reference letter from wherever you were coming from. Now that document is no longer necessary, and there is an account manager that has been appointed as a point of contact, as an escalation, a facilitator, to open new bank accounts for employees. There is the other aspect of corporate banking, and that is, I would say, the picture is less rosy. And in general, I think in the blockchain space there is a lot of potential to create an alternative banking system, as you know. And there could be some hybrid models that will come maybe shortly with the regulation on the exchange and
but
the
do we need a specialist bank just for ICT type companies, for blockchain, for gaming, for these areas? Does government need to step in and provide some sort of a solution if it wants to attract all these companies?
I think it will be a fantastic solution. I'm part of discussions with foreign banks to see if they would be interested in coming. But they perceive the gaming sector, they perceive the blockchain as being risky sectors. So as they balance their own businesses, because they have their own. So I understand their point of view as well, and the banks here in Malta are overexposed from that perspective.
Because if you can't run funds through, you can't run a business. So
Absolutely.
really
You can't pay salaries. And
Carla, you're very big in the DLT space. You're very much one of the drivers now. How can is that something that can play a role for the gaming industry going into the future?
I think that blockchain in general will just disrupt the financial service sector as a whole. We talk about how like adoption of traditional banks to blockchain, and I think that it will be very much the entrepreneurial aspects that will come upon that sector rather than, I think that the sectors will meet each other both ways, but I think the innovation and the impact upon banking is going to come from the startup side inwards. And I'll give you 2 examples. So you've got Binance looking at setting up their own bank. Why? Because they had troubles setting up their own bank, getting a bank account. And then you have another example of, I think it's Palladium, which is another attempt of a blockchain-based banking solution. Do these companies have challenges? Yes, of course they do. And we can look at M-Pesa as an example in Africa as going into a country or a continent almost, but let's say M-Pesa, the Kenya model, where the banking solution doesn't suffice what's there. So in comes technology, in comes innovation, and it adopts in a different methodology. And the other point here is that at the moment in the blockchain and DLT sectors, there are hundreds of startups that are literally starving for 25K, 50K to keep their technologies going. And we are talking here about talent. And some of the top talented people that I know are the ones that have been through a lot of the gambling companies that sit in front of you. They've been already part of these infrastructures. They know the nuts and bolts of your organizations and how they work. And they've gone on to becoming entrepreneurs. Yet these entrepreneurs are sitting in their little offices for geniuses around the table thinking, shit, I don't have 50K, and that could be, you know, the solution that I could bring onto the table. And then for some of the larger companies on the island, you'd be potentially acquiring equity from an M&A perspective.
So innovation funds need to start coming in.
It needs to go full cycle.
Yeah.
So if you look at an example in Sweden, for example, Epicenter is a large building. It's just like a big office block in the middle of Stockholm. And their goal and their target there is to get the big companies in first and then surround them with startups.
I want to go back to the beginning. Trevor, you mentioned about going abroad, getting licenses and doing these things. Malta has been in the world media quite a bit. We hear a lot. Is this impacting business really, or is it just something that's out there?
The impact is there. I'm not going to say there isn't any impact, because when we go and get our licenses abroad, we are asked questions. Currently, we're going through an application in the US. One of the first questions raised, we have a license in Italy. What sort of business do you do in Italy? This is coming from a US regulator. And you explain, we have a license, we do it with an Italian license, we're not running an Italian operation with our Maltese license. It's completely separate and distinct from the rest of the operations. And just like we are asked these questions and we want to supply into the market, so we're not going to be a B2C, we're going to be a B2B. Just like we are asked these questions, there are other operators who we speak to, and they are asked the same questions, sometimes even more awkward questions. So most of the negative press is linked, unfortunately, to the Italian sector. So the Italian operators, they came to Malta, set up shop. Initially, they were running things with a Maltese license. Later on, the most recent round we have seen, including, unfortunately, this morning, there's further negative press on the Times of Malta regarding the Italian operations. Most of these actually had Italian licenses. So sometimes Malta gets a bit of stick, even when it doesn't deserve it, because, frankly speaking, these are Italian operators with Italian licenses. So they should be also falling under the watch of the Italian regulator over here as well.
The MGA is making a lot more moves than that.
When you hear finally, that there is going to be cooperation, because this is something that we have been asking for a long time. This is a bit of a personal experience for us. A number of those those operators into the Italian market actually were running with fake or cloned content, including our own. So Greentube, Novomatics content being copied and delivered into the market. And we get the regulator chasing after us. AMS in Italy,
so it's
asking, and we can't go to the MGA repeatedly. Listen, can you please handle this situation? Can you please handle this situation? Eventually, a year later, ICE of last year, action was taken. And it took a year, but it's positive. And now listening that the regulators are speaking to each other and communicating with each other, well, that for an operator based in, I'll say it again, the hub that Malta is a good sign, and it's a positive sign. If the regulators don't work together, then us as operators won't have the growth opportunities that we actually need in the new reality, which is getting licenses in the different jurisdictions.
Enrico, can I bring you on this?
Yeah, I think it's to me, this is a broader topic. It's a very important topic, and it's broader than the gaming, just the iGaming industry. Malta as a country has a reputational issue in the press, in the international press. I don't think that Malta is doing enough as a country from the government to dispel this negative reputation. And it's impacting not only the licensing and the reputation, but it's impacting the banking, it's impacting potential investors that are questioning investing in companies that are based in Malta or that have offices in Malta. So we are really encouraging the government, Silvio, and to really take a very strong stance when it comes to money laundering, when it comes to really ethicals, and a state where the rule of law is upheld as a very high standard.
Very good. Unfortunately, I see we have a red light. So thank you so much, everybody, for sharing your thoughts and opinions. And I hope for everybody it was some insight for government and some areas to be taken up. So as Budney was saying, that's it, folks.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys, for that panel session. Before we move on to our next session in this room, there will be an M&A and deals workshop taking place in the breakout room. So if anyone's interested, can they head over there now? This session will be led by Hermione Archula from KPMG Malta. And the panelists will be David Anderson from Vinge, Tom Dieno from KPMG Philadelphia, Johannes Styron from Delanti, and Massimo Caruso from Catena Media. Okay, let me give it to Paul Foster. This stage. We have AML and social responsibility as an existential business threat. We have Jason Chess from Wigan moderating the session. And the panelists are Claudia Caruana from Gaming Innovation Group and Dominic Micallef from the MGA.
That's all right.
Is the mic working? Can everybody hear me? Is the mic on? Yeah, that sounds good. You ready, guys? Kick off. Two gentlemen need no introduction from me. They're very well known. Very interesting to have Claudio and to have Dominic. One from obviously very well-known, respected operator, and another from the regulator. And I'm hoping that their two divergent opinions will give us a bit of colour on the regulatory problems, compliance problems that we've had. Now, Simon and a number of the other contributors have touched on the enforcement actions that have been undertaken against particularly Maltese operators by, in particular, the British regulator. As you all know, at one point, the British regulator had no fewer than 17 licensees from the island going through a process of regulatory enforcement. Regulatory enforcement can range from informal communication all the way through to a full-blown license review. One of the consequences of a license review can be the revocation of a license or the suspension of a license. Failing that, a substantial fine. The fines, as we've seen, have been coming into the millions of sterling. I think it's true to say that there are more to come, and it's true to say that they're probably getting bigger. And disturbingly, the British regulator is now looking at the concept of affordability as one of the metrics that it takes into account in assessing these fines. So they're even giving up on the idea of looking at what you've made and looking at the money or the profit you may have made from whatever wrongdoing it might be, and they're now simply looking at what the business can afford. And Simon touched on it earlier, and we've had a number of these cases, and the hope, I think, on the part of the regulator, I think also it's true to say the hope in the industry is that these enforcement actions have really been a shot across the bows for an industry that's been meteorically successful, that has expanded at an exponential rate, but perhaps if we were to look at ourselves and be honest, we might say that in that sort of explosive process over the last 10 years, corners may have been cut. So I suppose the first question for Claudio and the first question for Dominic really is really a philosophical one, a general one, really whether the feeling and the spirit and the philosophy of doing business here on the island has changed, and whether the businesses now are in a mood, are in a sort of ethical and conceptual position, Claudio, whereby they genuinely do understand that compliance is something that they have to get right. Otherwise, this is going to be a big problem for potentially their survival, certainly their profitability.
Sure. Thank you, Jason. So, I mean, given the eye-watering sanctions that have been handed out to a number of operators, and as you've rightly said, it seems to have been indicated that 17 of those had actually been operators which were operating out of Malta. I think it's very difficult, and it would be almost shocking that any C-level group within a company would turn a blind eye to the public statements that are being issued by the Gambling Commission. So I'd be very, very surprised that if social responsibility, responsible gaming, AML and CSR initiatives in general have not been on the agenda at the top of that list of the major gaming operators currently. Obviously, we can debate whether there's proportionality being implemented behind the sanctions that are being handed out. But definitely, the impact is definitely felt. And perhaps that is also due to the magnitude of the fines that are being issued. Besides that also, now investors and shareholders also have a very profound interest in what we are doing, what the boards and the C-level group thinks about social responsibility, and they are also paying a lot more attention to that, which certainly brings the message home that we need to do something about it and we need to act fast. And certainly the Gambling Commission has done a very good job at reminding us that we need to do things. Yeah. And I mean, Dominic, from your point of view and the point of view of the MGA, life goes on. You're going to have, with the influx of business from Gibraltar, the influx of the potential regulation of further European markets, you're going to have more operators on your plate, you're going to have more responsibility on your plate before long. And when, the MGA and Heathcliff, you talk about raising the bar, what do you have in mind? You're the premier licensing hub now, you're the premier jurisdictional hub. I mean, what's the vision from you as an enforcement officer of what you want to see from your customers, as it were, going forward?
Well, yes. First of all, one has to bear in mind also that gaming operators from this year, they have more responsibilities than the previous years because now they are as well subject persons. So every operator must keep in mind that if we take the local legislation, which is quite a bit different from the UK, where the issue, for instance, of anti-money laundering is split between two authorities. The Malta Gaming Authority, its main role is to supervise and examine the operators that they are adhering with their AML obligations. Whereas, as for sanctioning, if an operator is in breach, the administrative fine and the breach are issued by the FIU. So they are the sanctioning body to issue the administrative fines. This doesn't mean that as an authority, we cannot as well, in addition to that fine, cancel or suspend the license. So from a regulator, what I see it this way, that subject persons have the role to prevent one of the most serious organized crimes. So if a person is going to launder money, according to Maltese law, that is punishable by 18 years imprisonment. So subject person has this responsibility to prevent that crime from happening.
Yeah.
And in view of this, in view of the seriousness of this crime and the obligations, if we take our legislation as well, yes, I understand that maybe the UKGC fines sound quite astronomical, but if they are obviously proportionate or not, that's up to the UKGC to decide that. And also probably, I don't know, but maybe the operators can challenge those type of fines. But if we take our legislation as well here in Malta, due to these strict obligations, strict responsibilities, our legislation also states that whoever is in breach of these obligations, the maximum fine is €1 million. So when the authority is faced with these kind of breaches, it will take into consideration the maximum fine and the result of that breach, what it could be.
Yeah.
That personnel, that persons, players, were able to launder their illicit proceeds. So one has to keep this in mind. And I think, and this year, the authorities, we started as a supervisor now, because legally now we are the supervising authority, which will do the examination. I think that it didn't drill down enough on gaming operators about these new obligations. And this has to start from board level.
Yes.
I mean, the risk appetite rests with the board, and also that the board will have this risk appetite that, listen, now we are facing new challenges, we are facing new obligations, and we have to enhance our compliance.
Yeah.
Honestly, so far we did 33 examinations. I know that the implementing procedures came into force in July, so now there's more maybe clarity of how operators have to operate and practice. But as for compliance nature, I think it's more a change of culture.
Yes. So, I mean, and that's an interesting conclusion to that point, you know, Dominic, because, of course, one of the changes that one would expect to see in response to this is, of course, a governance change, a cultural change. I mean, you're looking at businesses, and as I say, they've expanded very rapidly. Profit and customer acquisition is maximized. And so, you know, you, Claudio, as a responsible operator, and you, Dominic, as a regulator, do you expect to see, for example, compliance operators and general counsel put on the board these people are present at board meetings. Compliance and customer interaction, social responsibility is an agenda on board meetings. So do you expect to see the culture and as well as the culture, but the structure of the business is changing to empower the people inside the business who are going to achieve compliance?
Yes, sure enough. In fact, that's why there's this interesting person within the operation, which is called the Money Laundering Reporting Officer. And that's why the MLRO, according to the implementing procedure, should be independent, should work independently. And the structure of the MLRO is like twofold, that he will deliver to the board the risk of AML. And the risk appetite of the board, then he has to push it down towards all maybe the officers of the company. Obviously, not every officer is an AML officer within that operator, but the culture should be enhanced in all the operation. For instance, if we take us, the authority, okay, we created an AML team, an AML department, which will focus on these examinations. However, throughout the authority, we give training to change the culture of all the officers. And in fact, maybe the first change is also in our due diligence process, in our onboarding process. For instance, whereas in the past maybe we focus more on the criminal probity of the UBOs, of the applicants, now we are going to focus as well on the structure.
On the processes,
is this AML-oriented? What policies and procedures are in place? What risk appetite there is in place? Are there risk documents, customer acceptance policy? So we are going to look to all this procedure. And also, for the first time, apart from the checks on the money laundering reporting officer regarding criminal probity and the stuff, we are going to introduce also an interview. So the new MLROs will be interviewed, nothing exceptionally, it's not a grilling or something like that, but at least that they are aware of the obligations of an MLRO, also that they are aware of what type of products, the markets of the company, where the risks are coming from, or maybe they will face, so that we'll know that the MLRO also has a knowledge about the operation of the operator, of the gaming operator.
I think also one thing that we need to keep in mind is that now we're seeing a shift in the way regulation is sort of organized. Whereas in the past, perhaps under the remote gaming regulations in Malta, we're used to a bit of a prescriptive regime. And perhaps local operators were used to a regime whereby the law or the regulations actually told you at what point you need to conduct certain checks or certain due diligence and what you would need to request. And if the authorities would actually come to audit you, you could have had a bit of an expectation and anticipation of what they would be looking for. I think with the new regulations, and it sort of also converges with regulation that's being passed in other countries as well as the UK, it's more an outcome-based approach. It's more objective-driven. Whereby the regulators are telling us, this is what you need to do. You need to make sure that you are preventing money laundering and minimizing harm caused by your product. The way you do it is up to you, as long as it's transparent and you are accountable for it. So I think the compliance teams and even the boards need to realize that there is no one magic formula that will work for the companies. It's just a structure of having your own strategy and making sure that your strategy is achieving the objective and the outcome is exactly what the regulators are expecting.
And one of the very noticeable things, Dominic, about the British enforcement and the fines is that all of the licensees who've suffered these enforcement actions, they have been in possession of adequate data. They've been in possession of the data and the knowledge that they needed in order to implement the processes and implement the procedures. And very often, with the best intention, the processes or the procedures themselves internally fell down. It might be as simple as some guy going on holiday, or someone fails to keep a file note, or the records weren't there. So when looking at people? Are you looking at the robustness? Do you actually road test or stress test? You're looking at the robustness, not only that they know what they're doing, but that these processes can actually work?
Yes, in fact, as part of the examination will not start on site. The examination will start off-site, where we will look all through the documentation, if there's documentation in place, and then we go on site. What is lacking, in my opinion, as well, is that there is lack of documentation. If there's a policy and procedure, maybe there is a person who knows it, but it's nowhere written.
Yes.
So if that person leaves, no one knows what he's going to do.
Sure.
And that's, I mean, is quite at fault, because it doesn't mean that only the MLRO should be knowledgeable, but even the people, even the front officers, should know what the policy is, what the procedures are. And I think that is still lacking, the lack of documentation. As well, in fact, to see about the robustness of the whole operation, that's why when we are on site, we take a number of samples. Okay, sometimes an examination, nowadays, it takes us about 2 or 3 days to perform a whole examination. Maybe in the future, it will be longer. But we take that amount of samples as well, so that we will check if the system is robust enough or not.
Sure.
So if, for instance, if we take 10 samples and we see that everything is okay, that is fine. If we see that out of that 10 samples that we took, 5 are not as good, then we take a broader sample.
And by samples, Dominic, what you're looking at, for example, what? You're looking at an instance of irresponsible gaming, or you're looking at an instance or something where there should have been an interaction with the customer? Or you're looking at some kind of test case where something bad has happened to the business and you're looking at the way it responds?
Yes. For instance, according to the policy, before a PEP is onboarding, and there is a requirement that there might be a management approval.
Sure.
We are going to check on site. Okay, but how is the process? So that the management approve that PEP. What is the process? And we see some samples of PEPs, and we have to see as well where is that management approval, how it is onboarding. For instance, regarding players coming from high-risk jurisdiction, on the policy and procedure, there will be that they will perform enhanced due diligence. But what kind of enhanced due diligence?
Yes.
So we see from those samples if the policy that is written is actually being operated in place, or sometimes even vice versa. Sometimes we see that the process is in place, but nowhere is documented. So if those persons will leave tomorrow, I mean, the operator will not have anything to show.
Sure.
About those policies.
If I can come to you, Claudio. I mean, you look at the statements and you look at what the businesses need to do. There's the internal management of risk, the internal processes, the procedure. Also, there is a changing attitude to the external risk factors, and I'm thinking about things like affiliate relationships. I'm thinking about things like VIP programs, and I'm thinking about various, the advertising that businesses undertake. There's a whole sort of matrix of risk out there. For example, Sky Bet, you'll have seen, just terminated its affiliate program because it wasn't confident it could ensure compliance across the affiliates. And we as a law firm have seen many people coming and saying, look, we need robust agreements with the affiliates. I mean, from your viewpoint, Claudio, how are you looking at all of that external risk? The affiliates, who they're putting through to you, the tension created when a business relies on VIP income streams, the internal tension that creates?
To start off with the VIPs, I think if a business nowadays is remaining afloat from its revenues generated from VIPs, unfortunately, I do personally believe that the business is running a risk of its revenues not being completely sustainable. there's profound interest by the regulators into VIPs. And the regulatory standard and expectation, understandably, is much higher in respect to VIPs. So I believe that there has to be some form of onboarding procedures in place for VIPs, so that before a player is actually invited to the VIP program, the operator actually ensures that that person is not a compulsive gambler, and that the only reason why that person has been invited to the VIP program is not only based on spend. But actually, one should look deeper and understand that that person actually wants to be part of the VIP program, that person affords his gambling spend. And we also sit on, as you've mentioned before, on a lot of data. So we need to also make use of data-driven technology to be able to analyze patterns and behaviors and to be able to respond to changing patterns and behaviors in as near real time as possible, to make sure that if we need to interact or intervene, we do it in a manner which is timely, and also we do it in a manner which is effective. Because unfortunately, some old systems would send an email to a customer when a customer is online, and that's not really effective, because obviously if a customer is playing on his phone, you would want some kind of pop-up that disrupts the activity. And we know that the regulators, especially we've heard this straight out of the horse's mouth in the UK, where they said that the products themselves need to be socially responsible, and they need to offer these responsible gaming features in themselves. And it would be insufficient if you are using other methods just to comply with the regulations, seemingly, but if it is not really effective to players. So that's the part on VIPs, but also in respect to affiliates, I think there in that respect, we are doing a lot more due diligence when it comes to affiliates. We've had to also upgrade our contracts. But obviously contracts are not always enough, because at times the sanctions that we might receive due to breaches done by the affiliates might far outweigh the assets that the affiliate might have to actually pay you and indemnify you.
The benefit that they're delivering.
Exactly. So what we are doing from my point of view is communicating very clear guidelines to the affiliates, and besides that, we've also developed our proprietary compliance tool, which actually can scrape the internet and see where our brands are mentioned. And it can notify and alert us when our content is perhaps on certain sites which might be appealing to children, certain other sites that we don't want to have any association with. So we are investing a lot more nowadays in automation, because I think automation is key to delivering compliance.
Yeah. And that's an interesting one, isn't it? Because of course, in a way, you could take a step back and you could look at the whole problem. You could look at the whole issue that we've had, and you could almost say that it was a people issue. And some of the other speakers, some of the other delegates earlier have talked about, the ability to track the right people in the island. I mean, do you think it's true to say that in the past, the compliance, the regulatory, the money laundering people were perhaps in the businesses regarded as a bit second class?
I think they were siloed rather than second class. I think they were placed, they were perceived as a back office function, and I don't think they were properly integrated with the other teams. I think for compliance to be effective, it needs to function in the different business units. There needs to be the central compliance team as a supporting function. But I believe it's extremely important that there's a compliance officer within the marketing team, within the affiliate team, and within all the customer support, etc., etc. I think that's the only way that compliance can really be effective. I think in the past, compliance was more that kind of role dealing with regulators, making sure that the content on the website is safe. Now the role of compliance has really been upgraded, and we are now entrusted with a lot lot more in the company.
Sure. Well, the red light down there is flashing at me, so we've come to the end. Dominic, we're going to end with you very, very quickly. A proper kind of TV soundbite from you, please. Are you happy that Malta is the premier licensing hub going forward? Are you happy when you get up in the morning, you go to work, and you put your tie on, you go to work? Are you happy that you're going to have the highest, that you're also going to have the highest standards as well as the most populous licensing jurisdiction?
Yes, in fact, that is a challenge, the primary challenge for the authority. As I started before, subject persons have new obligations, but also the authority has these new obligations and these responsibilities, where as an authority we have to outreach more with the industry, where we have to guide them more. And in fact, maybe next year, we will look at the common findings that we found, and we will or issue guidelines or provide a seminar. Because, yes, I will be happy when, as an authority, we would make our utmost to educate the industry and to be clear more about their responsibilities and their obligations.
Sure, brilliant. Well, thank you very much to Dominic and Claudio. Very interesting, two different perspectives from the regulator, from an operator. Thank you, both of them, for subjecting themselves to the interview, to the armchair. And please show your appreciation of Dominic and Claudio.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.